Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's September 27th, 2024 program, Who Will Be Oregon's Next Attorney General? My name's Andrew Kallick, and I am City Club's president. We're coming to you from our new home at the historic Wow Hall in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us in person, online, and over the radio. Since 1990, City Club has been dedicated to our founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, and to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum Community and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. And welcome back to the students this week. It is great to have you. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. You might have that fall feeling in the air, but we have one more week of our Summer of Support campaign. So please go to cityclubofeugene.org and give what you can so we can continue to bring this programming to folks from the coast to the Cascades. With that, I'm happy to turn the mic over to KLCC's Michael Dunn, who will introduce the candidates and moderate today's discussion. Michael.
Thank you very much. And hello to you all, and welcome to the City Club of Eugene and today's forum with the two candidates vying to be Oregon's next Attorney General. As mentioned, I'm Michael Dunn, host of KLCC's Oregon on the Record, and I will be your moderator. Here are the rules for today's forum. Each candidate will be allowed a 3-minute opening statement. The bulk of the program will be questions from me, the moderator, to each candidate. They will be afforded 2 minutes to answer the questions. Each candidate will get the exact same questions. And then each candidate will have a 2-minute closing remark. We did a coin flip earlier to determine which candidate will go first. That candidate is Will Lathrop. Therefore, Dan Rayfield will go first with the closing comments at the end of the program. So let's meet our candidates. And gentlemen, why don't you join me here on the stage? Will Lathrop is an experienced prosecutor, proven leader, and dedicated public servant who has spent his entire career protecting women and children from violence, abuse, and exploitation. As Attorney General, he will protect children from abuse, crack down on public corruption, and hold drug traffickers accountable. Dan Rayfield is an experienced attorney and former Speaker of the Oregon House. He currently serves as state representative for Oregon House District 16, encompassing Oregon State University and Corvallis, where he lives with his wife Amanda and son Adam. Please welcome our two candidates. So what we're going to do is the candidates will come to the podium for their opening comments. So Mr. Lathrop, the microphone is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the Eugene City Club for putting this on. It's a lot of work. And thank you to all of you for coming to take part in this. I'm just going to tell you my background, why I'm running, and what I hope to do when elected. My name is Will Lathrop. I'm from a little town called Joseph, Oregon, on the far east side of the state. I don't know if any of you have ever been over there, but it's a great place. Okay. Yeah, let's clap for Joseph. I came to the Willamette Valley to get my law degree, and after law school, I became a prosecutor in McMinnville, so Yamhill County, was recruited away to Marion County to join their Special Victims Unit, where I prosecuted child sex abuse cases, also homicide, adult sexual assault, and domestic violence cases, but the majority of my time was spent on protecting children from violence. I was then recruited to Washington, D.C. to do that at the national level, and from there, I was asked to lead multinational teams in Africa by a global human rights organization. And so that's where I was for the 8 years previous to running for office. I was first in East Africa in a country called Uganda, working with the government there to prevent violence against women, particularly land violence against widows. And then I led teams in West Africa, in a country called Ghana, where we partnered with the US State Department, UNICEF, and the Ghanaian government to take on child trafficking and prosecute traffickers and traders. We also went into the Middle East and rescued women who had been trafficked for labor or for sex. I've always been a resident of Oregon, and every year my company would send me back for a month or two, and each year I came back to Oregon. It was like watching the frame-by-frame death of my state. When I was recruited away to Washington, D.C. at the time, Oregon was thought to be on the forefront of victim protection, and now we're at the bottom of the list. And so it was never in my game plan to run for public office, but I felt duty-bound to come back and be a wave of new leadership that was going to focus on protecting people and solving problems and not engaging in radical politics. So my platform is very important, but it is also simple. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. We have serious drug trafficking problems in this case, in this state, and the Attorney General is charged with taking on all organized crime. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized retail theft. People are making millions of dollars off of exploiting addiction and just crushing families and communities, and it's the role of the Attorney General to push back. I have a lot of experience taking on international organized crime, and I'm going to do the same in Oregon. I'm going to make it exceedingly difficult for people to exploit other people's addictions and make their money that way. We're going to push back and make it hard to sell fentanyl in the state of Oregon. The second thing is child protection. We've become objectively an unhealthy place to raise children. DHS is fostering children in hotel rooms. We have a huge explosion of online sexual exploitation of children in our state, and just generally, our parks and neighborhoods are not safe for children to play in. And so I've spent my entire adult career working to protect children in Oregon, nationally and internationally, and we got to get back to that here in Oregon. And the last thing is corruption. The Attorney General is the anti-corruption wing of the government, and there's been too many instances of people misusing their office or misusing public funds, and you can count on me as somebody that's going to hold corrupt officials accountable, protect children, and take on organized crime. Thank you so much.
Representative Rayfield.
Again, thank you for having me here today. My name is Dan Rayfield. I am the Democratic candidate for Attorney General here in Oregon. And I have always believed that we best solve problems when we work together. And this is a belief that really was born in the way that I was raised. My father on one side was a Republican. He was a colonel in the Air Force Reserves, a senior vice president of a commercial insurance company. In fact, the first political event I went to as a child was a Dan Quayle fundraiser in downtown Portland, and I was dressed in a Boy Scout uniform. On the other hand, my mother is incredibly progressive. She was someone who would drag me to protests as a kid, which you don't want to go to as a child. She would also go to the Nevada nuclear test sites and get arrested protesting nuclear weapons. And one of the things that I would ask her as a kid, I was like, why do you go and protest and get arrested? And what she told me is that she believed we needed to have less nuclear weapons to make our world safe. Now, when I would ask my dad the exact same question, what he would tell me is I believe we need to have nuclear weapons to keep our world safe. And what you began to see as a child is two people you deeply love that want the same thing, but they're going about it in vastly different ways. And I've tried to take that leadership approach into the roles that I've had. Most specifically, over the last 2 years when I served as Oregon Speaker of the House, we brought Democrats and Republicans to the table as equals to pass one of the most comprehensive housing reform packages the state has seen. We also, most recently this year, brought Democrats, Republicans, law enforcement, and district attorneys together to pass one of our most comprehensive criminal justice reform packages, one that gave law enforcement the tools to get hard drugs off the streets, but also at the same time really recognize we need to solve the root cause of the problem we're seeing, which is substance abuse. I want to take this same leadership into the Department of Justice as your next Oregon Attorney General, where I want to continue the work to keep our communities safe, which means tackling the drug dealing that is going on, the drug delivery that's going on in all of our states. That means keeping our children safe across the state. Number two, I really believe we need to expand the work that we do on behalf of seniors and consumers, whether that is fly-by-night scams or whether that is predatory lending schemes. We need to have someone that has Oregonians back. And number three, we need an Attorney General that matches the values of all Oregonians and will defend Oregon's values from national attacks. And that is things like abortion rights and our environmental laws. And I look forward to doing all of those things with your support. Thank you.
Great, great. Well, thank you both, gentlemen. So now we'll start with the questions, and again, it's 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to answer the question. So I will ask each candidate the exact same question. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Lathrop. How do you personally define the role of Attorney General for the state of Oregon? And you have a microphone right there. Up here. Right there, yeah, exactly.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that question. The Attorney General is a complex position that wears a lot of hats, but the preeminent one is that the Attorney General is a preeminent law enforcement officer of the state of Oregon. That's both enforcing civil law and enforcing criminal law. It's also the chief child protection officer of the state. It's the anti-corruption wing of the government, and it's the entity that holds state agencies accountable, but also represents the state of Oregon in court against suits and land deals and other things like that. So it's a multifaceted role, but at the core of that is child protection, public safety, and enforcement of law. Thank you.
And I would echo a lot of what Mr. Lathrop has said. You are the chief legal officer for the state. The way that I like to think about it is you are the attorney to help keep Oregonians safe. What does that mean? That's partnering with law enforcement, district attorneys to be able to do some of those things. You heard us talk a little bit about that, where we're talking about tackling drug delivery, internet crimes against children. These are areas where you partner to really make progress in those areas where you're thinking about keeping Oregonians safe. When you heard the idea, you are the attorney for all Oregonians. That's something that we talk about quite often. What does that mean? That means when you have large inequities that have gone on in our community. So think about the big Monsanto case that the current Attorney General did, where you have forever pesticides that are now in our environment. It is the Attorney General's responsibility to look out for this state, to hold those actors accountable, to mitigate the harm that is done in our communities. That's on a really large scale, but then also think about it in a one-on-one level. So someone gets taken advantage of by a lemon car, someone gets taken advantage of predatory lending. If you can't find resolution in your private side of the attorney practice, I want and I believe the Attorney General should be the attorney for all Oregonians that they look to help solve some of those issues. There's a whole host of other issues. You advise all of the agencies as they go through and they're trying to make important decisions. That can be as small as contract procurement, right? That can be as large as how do you advance litigation when people are pursuing litigation against the state. I believe there's a lot of opportunities to borrow things from the private practice to have efficiencies within the way that we manage our state agencies. And with 30 seconds, we can't really get to all of those.
Terrific, thank you both. Next question. Obviously elected officials often are asked, setting your first 100-day agenda. Talk about those first 100 days and perhaps your top 3 priorities in that time period.
Me first again?
Yes.
Yeah, so first 100 days. My top priorities, again, are taking on organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft, protecting children, and taking on corruption. There's lots of things an Attorney General does, but there are core issues that are burning fires in the state of Oregon. We're all aware of those things. Oregon has become an increasingly unsafe state, and a lot of that is driven by drug crime. The Attorney General is supposed to run point on all organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized retail theft. All 3 of those things are astronomically high in the state of Oregon right now. The Attorney General should be running point, meaning building a collective plan with all of the law enforcement agencies, that's sheriffs, chiefs of police, and district attorneys, pushing resources to the ground where they're needed most, connecting back to the federal government, that's the FBI, that's DEA, that's Interpol, to start going after the high-level offenders in the drug trafficking chain. I've worked extensively in international organized crime. I've had a lot of success doing that, and that's why I have a lot of support from law enforcement across the state in my campaign. The second is child protection. We have a 530% increase of online sexual exploitation of children in Oregon over the last 7 years. Oregon is one of the worst states in the country at protecting our children from online predators. And so we have DHS, as I mentioned earlier, raising or fostering kids in hotel rooms. They've lost 13 kids in DHS custody this year alone. We have to have a change of direction in the child protection area of the state of Oregon. And the third thing is corruption. People are becoming less and less confident that the government is using their offices for the better good and the money for the better good and not for themselves or special interests. So you can count on me as somebody. I don't care if you're my brother's girlfriend, you're my mom, you're my enemy, it doesn't really matter. Everybody should be held accountable to the law the same, and that includes our elected officials. Thank you.
So let's talk about some of the quick things you can do, I think, in your first 100 days. The first thing is we just recently strengthened the laws in the legislature on drug delivery at the request of the district attorneys. We need to make sure that we're partnering with district attorneys to go after drug delivery. That's something we're seeing in every corner of the state, and that's something that we can and should do in those first 100 days. The other thing is you think about someone walking into a statewide role. What happens in that first 6 months of your tenure? You walk into your first legislative session with a budget that you have to then go advocate on. And this is the time where you can advocate to get progress on the things that you want to do. So when I said earlier that we need to expand the work to protect seniors and consumers, this means starting off, going to the legislature, making sure you have a budget to be able to do that, making sure that you have the resources to be able to do that. This is a wonderful opportunity where I want to build a working families unit that really has investigators and attorneys that goes after and tackles wage theft, child labor violations, misclassification of workers, where we're really thinking about one of those underlying issues about the inequity in our society. This is a really critical point to do. I think also, depending on how the election turns out nationally, the role of the Attorney General nationwide is going to have a very different tone and tenor. We've seen threats to our election laws. We've seen different dynamics like that. This is going to be an interesting element during those first 100 days of anyone's election when you come in as Attorney General, because you are the last line of defense when it comes to things like whether it's our election laws, abortion rights, and all of those. So that's something that weighs in the back of my head. I certainly hope that that's not a direction we move, but that is something that could be a reality, as it has been a reality in the past.
Great. Next question for you both. Often, states' attorney generals are asked to join in national litigation, examples such as litigation against tobacco companies or drug companies in the opioid crisis. What would be your criteria as AG for joining or declining to join national litigation? Mr. Lathrop, you're first.
We should probably switch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
fine, sure.
It gives, yeah.
Okay.
It's unfair. If
I was going to
always
do
go
that
in
halfway
second.
through, but that's fine.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. So when I think about national litigation, so let's orient your brains on the type of things that could come through. So there's the big opioid lawsuits that this state of Oregon received almost $1 billion in terms of the harm, to mitigate the harm that was done within the state. Those are things when, as Attorney General, those are things that can happen organically from within the Department of Justice, where you start evaluating the facts and the basis for those claims, or they can actually be ideas where other attorneys general work together. So in a lot of these lawsuits, you had Democrats and Republicans working together to go against big corporations to find the results. Now, sometimes as a state, you want to go in by yourself, and there's an advantage for you as a state bringing a case by yourself. So for instance, if you think about California and New York on a per capita basis, if you think about the Monsanto case I referenced earlier, if it was divided on a per capita basis, Oregon is at a disadvantage when it really should be about the harm to the citizens of each state. So you have to carefully weigh those decisions where you go. The decision whether to pursue a case has to be taken very carefully because there is risk and exposure to the state. There's also the integrity of the state and the Department of Justice when you move forward on something. So when you bring a case, you want to be confident, you want to be doing it for the right reasons, but it really should be for the entire benefit of the state or its citizens who have been harmed by someone else's wrongdoing.
You ready for me? Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. So the Attorney General's, one of the many roles is to protect the state from predatory businesses or from illegal government action, illegal federal action. So it's really important that the Attorney General is postured towards taking on multinational or multi-state suits. So the question is, what's the criteria? Well, probably every suit is a little bit different, but the important thing is that you have a protection, a law enforcement background, and somebody that is working on behalf of the Oregonians and working on behalf of protecting and not engaging in radical political agendas or trying to be part of large national movements, which some states' attorney generals misuse their office to do. What I'm particularly concerned about protecting the state of Oregon from is online sexual exploitation of children and all kinds of exploitation and coercion of children online. There's been a huge wave of access to our homes through social media, phones, iPads, video games, and computers, where people all over the world have access to our children, and it's very unregulated. There's a lot of privacy violations, and social media is making a lot of money off of capturing, grooming, and sucking children into an atmosphere that ultimately can be very, very unhealthy for them. So one of my first postures towards national suits or looking outside of the Oregon is really do what we need to do and start protecting our children from online exploitation. Thank you.
Terrific.
Me first?
We'll go with Dan first. We'll kind of, every 2 questions, we'll flip-flop. How's that sound?
And then we'll go to every 3 questions.
Exactly. And then we'll divide by
Yeah,
1.5. Terrific. And sorry I said flip-flop. That's never good in a political forum. Okay, the next question, starting with you, Dan, is the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs overturned the landmark case Roe versus Wade. What's your position on how Oregon law might eventually be impacted by that decision? How would you defend current Oregon law related to abortion?
Yeah, the way this plays out, and you've seen it in many other instances, is you will have, it depends on what happens at the national level. Right now, we've worked really hard to have some of the most forward-thinking rights and laws to protect abortion rights, and those are things that I worked on as Speaker of the House. And so I think we're very proud of where we sit as Oregon. The threat always comes from a national level. Case law is settled until it is not settled law. Now, we saw that most recently with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. One of the other big threats right now is you have a potential of a national abortion ban. This is very real. This is something that is frequently talked about. Now, what does that look like in terms of its impact to Oregon? What you will have is Republicans attorneys general in one camp working to talk about the supremacy of the federal abortion ban versus the Democratic attorneys general in another camp talking about that the state rights should control. You need an attorney general in this state that is going to work and defend our rights that we have on the books here in the state against those national threats under those situations. And that's what I would do under those circumstances. It's part of the reason that I'm endorsed by Planned Parenthood.
Perfect. Same question to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. The Dobbs decision really took away, really upset the landscape of abortion rights in the state of Oregon, I mean nationally, but not in the state of Oregon. Dobbs did nothing to affect abortion laws in the state of Oregon. And the role of the Attorney General is not to create law. The role of the Attorney General is to enforce law. And the laws in Oregon have been well settled for a really long time, and they're not likely to change at all. So as the next Attorney General, I'm going to do something simple. I'm just going to enforce the law as it is, and that's the job to do. But I think when people ask that question, what they're really asking is, are you going to protect women? Are you going to stand up for women? I've spent my whole career not talking about it or voting on it, but actually putting it on the line to defend women in court who have experienced domestic violence or serious sexual assaults. Nationally, the same. I've stood with widows who have been very badly beaten and almost murdered, with people trying to take their land, risked my own life to do that, and I've been working to rescue women from the Middle East. The same thing. It's the number one threat to women in the world and locally is violence. That's the threat to equality. That's the threat to freedom freedom from emotional and psychological harm. And so, in sum, the abortion law in Oregon is clear. It's settled. It's not going anywhere. And this office doesn't do anything to change that. And I'm going to follow the law, but I'm also going to work hard to defend women from violence.
Okay, and we'll stay with you for this next question. What would be your plan? I know you talked about this, but this gives you the opportunity to expand upon how you would address the proliferation of fentanyl in Oregon and the drug trafficking that brings it into the state.
I mean, that's my platform. That's what we need to do. We are so overrun by fentanyl in the state. Your firefighters, your hospitals, your schools, your police officers, they can't make any forward progress in simple, doing their simple emergency work because fentanyl is touching every single thing. You can hardly talk to somebody that doesn't know a family member or someone else who has died from fentanyl overdose, been addicted, or been significantly impacted. And the ages of children being exposed to fentanyl is getting younger and younger and younger and younger. It's a very, very scary drug. It's the most dangerous and addictive drug in human history, and we have failed to protect our state from it. There's the possession of drugs, right? The Attorney General doesn't do anything with the possession of drugs. That's for your local law enforcement. The drug industry, the people that make the cartels, the drug traffickers, it's an international, it's made in China, processed in Mexico, and brought here by a very organized drug cartel. And Oregon is very disorganized in our ability to take on the cartel and push back. I have been working on international organized crime for the last 8 years. I'm coming back to do that in Oregon because Oregon needs to be reorganized, have a collective strategy, start to plug into the federal agencies and Interpol, which goes across federal lines, so that we aren't arresting people that are possessing drugs or low-level drug dealers, but we're actually going to the head of the snake and cutting it off and making it exceedingly difficult to bring that dangerous drug into our state so that we can stop seeing 1,000 people die every year from fentanyl overdoses. So it's critically important. I have the experience to do that, and day one, I'm going to start working on it.
Same question to you, Representative Rayfield.
And this is a conversation that has been started a long time. When we first really started earnestly having this conversation was in 2023 when we started tightening the laws. And Mr. Lathrop's absolutely right. Think about that possession as normally the Attorney General's not involved in, but you still are tightening those laws. We then started tightening the laws to go at curb drug delivery in a much larger scale. And we started doing that in the 24 legislative session where we brought, in my Speaker of the House role, where we brought Democrats and Republicans together. One of the critical things that didn't get talked about in the papers was how does the Attorney General's office engage with that, the resources that they've had. And throughout the years, the Attorney General's office has not kept pace in their criminal justice division to the need that we've seen in our communities. So in the last short session, we added some investigators and attorneys who will better be able to partner with when you think about these cross-boundary issues with local law enforcement to be able to tackle fentanyl. So as we walk into this office come in January, that's something that I'm looking forward to, is making sure that those positions are hired up, making sure that we're utilizing them to then tackle the fentanyl issue that we're seeing in our communities.
Great. We'll start with you again. And my apologies, gentlemen, I should have said this at the top. If you could reintroduce yourself before you answer the question, just for our radio audience, just so they can determine who's speaking, that would be great. So, Will Lathrop, here's the question for you. Online fraud is a huge issue facing the public today. How would you use your position as Attorney General to protect Oregon consumers from such criminal activity?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really thoughtful question. My name is Will Lathrop, and I'm running for Attorney General.
Nicely done.
Thanks for the wave. At least got that part of the question right. So the Attorney General is the entity that is supposed to protect people not only from online exploitation like criminal law, but also consumer protection. It's very difficult for your local police or your sheriffs to be able to protect people in the state from scam artists or from exploitative practices from all over the globe or all over the country. And so the Attorney General the office has really failed to do that. And what we've done a good job is taking on large multinational corporations and winning big lawsuits, and that's important. What we've done a really bad job is protecting seniors from online scams, protecting immigrant communities from predatory lending and online scams. And so I want to be dedicated to building a safety net, being proactive, going after people before they start to steal and exploit and abuse, instead of waiting and reactively trying to chase these entities around the globe, because it's not working. There's just very few instances of Oregon having great success at prosecuting or enforcing the law when it comes to any sort of online scam, exploitation, or coercion. And so my background in online sexual exploitation of children as a prosecutor here at Oregon is going to serve me well to understand how to proactively look at those cases and eventually prosecute and win in civil court. Thank you.
Terrific. Same question to you.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit of an example from my private practice, and I've spent 18 years in private practice on behalf of individuals with consumer claims in this space. And so one of the things that you will see is you will have consumer claims that sometimes come into your law office. They might cross boundaries of states. They may be for smaller amounts, and you may not have the resources in private practice to pursue those. So those get referred to the Department of Justice so that people can be taken care of, be made whole. Often, just like any other law firm, there are not always adequate resources in the Department of Justice to be able to go after these, and they're picking and choosing which cases to pursue. That's when I talk about expanding the work we do to protect seniors and consumers. This is a big part of what I'm talking about, is really working more in this space. That's something we need to do, but you also need to think about education. In Oregon, we have a protection and education fund. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of those big settlements that we talk about where we are working on behalf of Oregonians, some of that money goes into what they call the protection and education fund. The reason the education is on there is to prevent these things from happening in the first place. There are some of these online scams that there's nothing that we can do about. They are people who are in different countries. And the best antidote for that is education. Having a centralized resource for the known scams. AARP works on some of this stuff. I think there needs to be a better partner at the state to make sure that we catch these things, so when you get a phone call, you know that there is a line, kind of like your 911, 988, 411, where you can go and just double check before you get taken advantage. Because once those dollars are out of your bank account, most of the time, it's too late. So we really need the education. Then for the folks that are within the United States, we need to be able to be pursuing and partnering with other attorneys general to make sure that we're going after, whether, again, I use this example of a fly-by-night timeshare scam. That is a real example of people that came in and out of our county fairs, taking advantage of people, taking their money, and in the state of Oregon, we did not have the ability to go after them. That has to change moving forward.
Okay. And Dan, we're going to stay with you, and I'll remind you to reintroduce yourself to our radio audience. Obviously, there's a well-known lawsuit against the Oregon Department of Human Services related to child welfare. It's already cost Oregonians $18 million. What's your position on the Attorney General's role in representing other state agencies? And what would be your criteria for settling, especially if it's costing a lot in terms of dollars and goodwill?
Yeah, and just to, again, Dan Rayfield, by background, the Attorney General's office does represent agencies when lawsuits get filed against them. So that is a core role and responsibility. One of the things that I have talked about is stealing some of the practices or borrowing some of the practices from the private side when we think about early resolution. There are a handful of cases that you can look at, and we've seen this in very different areas, that might be eligible candidates for a pilot program to pursue early resolution. It's a way where you can respect the folks involved, you can actually look at what is the appropriate way to resolve the case, and it saves everybody time and energy as you go through this process. I also think when we're thinking about hiring outside firms, we also need to really look about what is the right mixture of having in-house attorneys versus being the necessity to hire outside attorneys. And this is something we need to reevaluate as a state as we're trying to use our taxpayer dollars very wisely. I also think it's important when we think on the back end. We always think about when a lawsuit has happened. That means something wrong has gone on. The question should always crop up in our heads is how could we have prevented that in the future? What is done in the private side with insurance companies, we aggregate claims data. And then the insurance companies, because they are, off most of them, for-profit industries, they want to look at that claims data and report back to their clients and say, hey, if you did these things, you wouldn't have these claims, which would save everybody time and money. As a state, we don't do that. That's something that we need to do again. So you're thinking on the front end, managing it while it's going on, and then on the back end, preventing this from happening in the future. Again, when I've served as co-chair Ways and Means, as Speaker of the House, one of the things that we would see is the Department of Administrative Services, which manages the risk fund, they would come to the legislature asking for more of our taxpayer dollars to mitigate that risk. We need to make sure that those asks are much less in the future.
Same question.
Will Lathrop, candidate for Attorney General. So the question is about holding DHS accountable and your role as the Attorney General. The Attorney General wears two hats. One is that you represent the state agencies in court. And the other hat is you hold the state agencies accountable to follow the law. You have to wear both hats. Right now, the Attorney General's office has decided to consistently defend illegal DHS action, and that action has cost the state $18 million in damages, but it's also cost all the money they spent and the years and the time in court to defend something that was blatantly illegal. But the bigger issue is what was illegal is they were housing children and continue to house children, foster children, in hotel rooms. Children don't need, children need heat, they need rooms, they need food, but they need love and affection. They need somebody in the room with them that's watching over them and making them feel loved. And because they haven't done that, and you know this in Eugene, just recently there was a young man that committed suicide in a hotel room under DHS custody after repeatedly threatening to do that because the Attorney General didn't make DHS follow the law. You can count on me, who's somebody who's going to not defend illegal state action. I'm going to, as Attorney General, make the state agencies follow the law. And when they follow the law or there's some reasonable question, the Attorney General's office will defend them. But we will not defend illegal action because we've lost way too much money, but way more importantly, it's kids, it's human life. It's outrageous.
Okay. We go to you, Dan. Next question. So this next question for you is about Oregon's Measure 114 on gun safety, which is stalled by a judge in Harney County. What would your plans be as Attorney General with regard to that voter-approved measure going forward?
The role and the responsibility of the Attorney General, as I would move forward in this case, is you have acting pending litigation. The Department of Justice has its lawyers working on that case, defending the decision that we all made as voters on ballot measure 114. I would continue to use our resources, the attorneys of the Department of Justice, to implement the will of the voters that passed ballot measure 114.
All right, same question.
Make sure you give enough time for applause. My name is Will Lathrop.
And I was Dan Rayfield.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah, 114 was passed into law. It's now down the river. Court of Appeals will ultimately probably go to the Supreme Court to decide its constitutionality under the Second Amendment of the Supreme Court. But it's the role of the Attorney General to take those cases to court and follow them through when it's the will of the voters, and I will do my job well.
Terrific. And we're going to stay with you, Will, here on this next question. In the past few years, the state of Oregon has had several high-profile elected leaders resign from office over scandal. As AG, what actions might you take to develop and implement anti-corruption laws?
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. No. Yeah, Will Lathrop. So the Attorney General is it's the part of the government that's supposed to investigate all corruption and hold corrupt officials accountable. When I mean corruption, people that are misusing their office or misusing public funds. And we've seen that. And it shouldn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat or independent, unaffiliated. Nobody should be misusing their office or misusing public funds. So other than we can talk about Shamia Fagan, who kind of openly admitted that she was taking $10,000 from the marijuana industry when she's making like $7,000 from the state of Oregon, while auditing the marijuana industry, and was never held accountable, never did anything but get a better job after she left office. That's not going to actually change the equation. People have to be held accountable, criminally accountable, for misusing their office. But what I'm more concerned about is the misuse of public funds. We have this pattern in Oregon where we'll allot $500 million to addiction. We can all disagree about whether we should do that or not, but once it's allotted, we should all agree it should go to addiction, it should go to fix the problem. It goes to the governor, from the governor to the state agencies, from the state agencies to community-based organizations. And then regularly, the Secretary of State audits that money. It's addiction, homelessness, DHS. They audit the money, housing, all of it. And there's consistently 5 million missing here, 10 million missing here, 1 million missing here. There's unreceipted money, unaccounted for money in millions, tens of millions of dollars. And at the end, it goes in the Willamette Week, it goes in the Oregonian. We all go, oh, I can't believe this happened. And then nothing happens after it. It's the role of the Attorney General to come in and investigate that. It could be negligence, it could be bad receipting, but we have a right as a citizen of Oregon to know whether or not that's criminal or something else. But what's happened instead is it goes back to the legislature, and the Ways and Means Committee says $500 million didn't work last year. Let's allocate $600 million. And the snowball keeps growing, and somebody's getting rich, but nobody's getting better. And we have to make our money accountable.
Go ahead, Representative Rayfield.
Yeah. And so really quickly, I would agree that if there is misuse of public dollars, people need to be held accountable. You need to investigate it. Mr. Lathrop has cited an example from a headline of an article. I would encourage all of you to actually go look at the article. The misuse and the corruption that he's alleging under the circumstances is not what the article says. You can go look at the audit report as well, and it's a little bit of a different story, but I think values-wise we agree that if someone is inappropriately misusing public funds, they need to be held accountable. Absolutely. Also, in the other public corruption cases, investigations should be undertaken using the resources of the Department of Justice to hold people accountable when they are not following the laws. That is something that should happen. Sometimes there is a partnership between a federal investigation or a Department of Justice investigation. Whoever does the investigation, it needs to occur. Follow-up needs to occur, and then people need to be held accountable following the laws in Oregon.
Great. Back to you. Will Lathrop, the question for you is, as best you can in a short period of time, talk about the strategies you would employ to go after organized crime in Oregon.
Yeah, so it's not hypothetical. Oh, sorry, Will Lathrop. It's not hypothetical to me. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft, they're all similar. They're commodity-based crimes where people are exploiting other people, vulnerable people, to make money. I was just doing that in West Africa. I worked in conjunction with foreign governments, with with the MOU with the Ghanaian government and works in conjunction with all of the different agencies, police, prosecutors, courts, and social workers in different countries to build a collective strategy to come together, share information, share resources, and start to become really organized as the organized crime is around. We were able to reduce the level of human trafficking, of child trafficking in our project area by 36% in 5 years by prosecuting the traffickers, by holding them accountable. 60 traffickers were convicted in court, and that hadn't really ever happened before. And then you broadcast that back, and you say, Oregon's not a place you can sell drugs. You will go to jail if you're outside of our state and you're bringing fentanyl and methamphetamine to our state. You will go to jail. And that cools the market. You have to enter risk into the market. Right now, it's never been easier to sell and buy drugs in anywhere in the United States than it is in Oregon right now. I can't speak exactly for Eugene, but there's open-air drug markets in Portland. Everybody's very aware of them. You can buy fentanyl for 75 cents a pill. You can die for 75 cents in the state of Oregon. Until we make it really, really hard to bring those drugs into our state, until we make it really hard to find those drugs, we're not going to get any relief. I don't talk about it, again, hypothetically. It's what I was just doing, and I've had a lot of success taking on organized crime. So thank you.
Great. Dan Rayfield, same question for you.
You're now introducing me because I have continually refused to introduce myself. But it is Dan Rayfield. I'll try and do better with that. When it comes to tackling fentanyl use drug delivery in our state, again, I think we need to look at, we did tighten the laws most recently. These are going to be incredible tools with the resources we just added to the Department of Justice, the investigators and the attorneys to then deliver teams by partnering with local DAs and law enforcement. Now, when I say that, things that had gone on in the past, DOJ used to be a wonderful resource for district attorneys, and they would provide technical experience when we would be trying to get wiretaps. That has gone away due to resource constraints. Part of the reason we added these folks into the Department of Justice, the attorneys and the investigators, is to be able to start doing that again, being a better partner to then tackle and go after these issues. That's something that I think could be an incredible asset. Looking forward to use that. I also think one of the things that we've had in the past in the Department of Justice, in the executive office, the Attorney General's office, you had an attorney where their purview was criminal justice. As the Attorney General, shocker, I'm not day in and day out on the minutia of case. You need someone in the executive office that is solely focused on delivering the vision and the values of the office. Right now, there is not a special Attorney General in the executive office that would focus on criminal justice, and that's something that I would add into the office as well to add steam to the vision, to keep the pressure on to tackle fentanyl.
Okay. We're going to stay with you, Dan Rayfield. The next question goes like this. Talk about what you see as the current weakness in the Oregon Department of Justice in terms of protecting children, and what might you do to strengthen protections for Oregon's children?
So, and one of the things that I would say is we're thinking about how does the Attorney General strengthen protections? You're enforcing law. So if you want to strengthen protections, part of what you would have to do is, are you talking about laws creation in a policy sense? So I always want to make that distinction for this group, that when we're talking about protecting children, that is using the existing laws and enforcing them. One of the other things that we recently did was increase the internet crimes against children amounts. Now, this is something that was under review in 2023. The Department of Justice was still working on that, and we were able to increase the funding for the internet crimes against children. That's something that we need to continue to pursue. I also wholeheartedly agree with my opponent when it comes to social media and the influence on our children, especially when I have a 13-year-old that is using programs that lack the security mechanisms for their own privacy in these spaces. This is something we face day to day. I also believe that when it comes to the Department of Human Services, there are ways to keep the pressure on to be able to continue to make sure that DHS is following the laws when they are working to keep our children safe. That is ultimately what the Department of Service should be doing, is keeping our children safe, removing them from unsafe conditions, and once they're there, keeping them safe under those conditions. That is another incredible area that we need to work on as well.
Will Lathrop, same question for you.
Yeah, Will Lathrop. Gosh, so much. So I'll start with internet crimes against children. That's online exploitation of children. As I mentioned earlier, it's never been easier for people all over the country and all over the globe to have access to your children and to coerce them and trick them into doing all kinds of things that will change the very course of their life. And we have 5 investigators at Department of Justice right now who specialize on ICAC cases, internet crimes against children. That's the same amount of investigators we had in 2009 when I was trying those cases. The crime has exploded, and we've remained the same. The budget has just recently narrowly been bumped up, but we have the same amount of investigators. Idaho has half of our population and has 21 investigators. Washington has 28 investigators. We are woefully inadequate at the Department of Justice to build a safety net and investigate cases, to hold people accountable for taking advantage of our children. And it's just shameful. I mean, we have really failed our children. It's shameful. I will hold DHS accountable. I will work hard, not for just in resources. The expertise and the leadership and the vision are also very important. I'll work hard to build a safety net for our children from things we talked about, social media, online sexual exploitation. But just as importantly, we have to start educating parents and children about the dangers of fentanyl. It's going into our schools. I talk to people all the time that don't know what fentanyl is or how dangerous it is. And little kids are accidentally taking it, ingesting it, and dying. And teenagers are also overdosing in the state of Oregon, accidentally thinking they're smoking marijuana or something else as laced with fentanyl. We have to raise the education of parents, teachers, and children across the state about the threat of drugs, because it is deadly and it is pervasive. So thank you.
Okay. Dan Rayfield, this next question for you. Consumer protection obviously extends to housing and homeowner protection. Talk about your vision in terms of protecting homeowners or people who want to buy homes in Oregon. Housing is such a huge issue in our state.
So this is a really broad conversation. I think when we think about housing and homelessness is number one big issue that we're seeing in every community across the state. The first thing the Department of Justice needs to do is take a look at its procurement process. And I know this is going to be boring, but one of the issues that we need to do is when the legislature allocates money, and when we had one of the most historic funds, that money needs to get out in the community. And there has been a lag time within the Department of Justice and with other agencies in getting that money out the door. And often what happens right now is people point fingers, and they point fingers back at each other. It's the Department of Justice is slowing things down. It's the other agencies slowing it down. It doesn't matter where the fingers are pointed. We need solutions to be able to deliver on the things that we're seeing in our community. So that's one of the projects that needs to be reworked in the housing space. Then you're going to think about landlord and tenant laws. There's an educational component that goes into helping other attorneys and having the resources for other attorneys representing people who are renting, because one of the things that we want to do to prevent homelessness is prevent people from losing their housing when they shouldn't. That's an incredible role and responsibility that needs to be undertaken in that spot. And then you get into what we kind of consider on the other end of that spectrum of housing, right, when people are thinking about home ownership and moving forward in that space. A really important thing that we need to do there is when you think about predatory lending and people being taken advantage, whether there are people not following the laws in terms of in lending, those are things that the Attorney General can actually have a tremendous impact on. You see a lot of online lenders right now, whether it's on apps and other things like that. This is the area where the Attorney General can make sure that everybody is being treated fairly and that no one is violating the laws.
Great. Will Lathrop, your question.
Can I ask you to read the question again?
Sure. What would you do as Attorney General to protect homeowner rights and people wanting to buy their first home?
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for that question.
Sure.
That's a really thoughtful question. So the Attorney General's office, there's no silver bullet in any government. We're built to be a government of separation of powers. And so the Attorney General has a very specific role in government, and that is really law enforcement. So what the Attorney General can do is enforce laws that protect people from predatory lending, can protect from people from securities scams, from antitrust actions, but the Attorney General at the end of the day has to enforce the law. And you can count on me in any category, if it's consumer protection, if it's housing, if it's environment, if it's any single thing, you can count on me who is somebody who's going to diligently lead the team to enforce the law fairly and justly.
Okay. Yeah. And we're going to stay with you, Will Lathrop. This question here is, can you talk about your efforts to limit the availability of ghost guns and untraceable guns in Oregon?
Yeah, Will Lathrop. For those of you who don't know what ghost guns or untraceable guns, so ghost guns can be guns that are undetectable, plastic guns undetectable at airports, or they could be guns that don't have serial numbers. And so there's new law that's put in the books that is really up to local law enforcement to enforce, and that we've sort of banned or made those guns unlawful. The role of the Attorney General really isn't in enforcing those local laws, but the role of the Attorney General is probably looking more at the illegal organized crime global gun trade, because legal guns exist, right? Illegal guns and guns and organized crime also exist. And the Attorney General should be taking a hard look at what illegal guns are coming. They're definitely coming into Oregon, where they're being distributed and who's responsible for that. At the end of the day, as a prosecutor, many of you may not know this, but it was my job to report to the scene of deaths, homicides. I've been to gun violence, gang-related homicides. I've been to teen suicides. I've been to accidental shootings. I've seen what can happen when guns are misused. And you can count on me as somebody who is going to enforce the law and going to do it, again, justly and fairly in that area as well. Thank you.
Okay. Dan Rayfield, same question for you.
Dan Rayfield. I have a very clear record when it comes to gun violence prevention from my very first session in the legislature, where we put universal background checks on all bills. The ghost gun bill that was referenced in the question was a bill that came out of my office and the work that our office led with the Attorney General to pass a ban on ghost gun bills. This is a very partisan bill in the legislature. We passed it. We did it respectfully because I really believe it will make an impact in the safety of our communities moving forward. One of the interesting roles of the Attorney General is this illegal delivery component and a more higher level, thinking in a supply and distribution level. Then there's this interesting dynamic that's going on right now in communities across Oregon, where we pass laws, gun safety laws, and local sheriffs and local counties sometimes choose to not want to enforce those laws. It puts the Attorney General into a very interesting situation of people in those communities expect the laws to be enforced, but sometimes they just aren't. And that's something that I think should be reevaluated at the Department of Justice to make sure that we're partnering with local law enforcement to ensure all of our gun safety laws are being enforced for the safety of those communities, because it doesn't matter whether you're living in Baker County, whether you're up in Multnomah County or in Benton County, you should have that same level of safety as a parent or a child going to school or just walking through your supermarket.
Terrific. Thanks to you both for answering my questions. Time has flown by, we're at the end, and so now we're coming to the... Yeah, exactly. We're coming to the closing statement. So each candidate has 2 minutes, and as the coin flip dictated, Mr. Rayfield, you're up first. You can either come to the podium or stay there, whatever you'd prefer.
We'll get up.
All right.
Thank you again for having us here today. Again, my name is Dan Rayfield. There's 3 things that I really want to bring to this office. The first is the personal lens. One of them, again, is this belief that we can solve our greatest challenges by working together, and I've shown that in the legislature. Another one is a lens that I bring to this job is I didn't take a straight and narrow path in this world to get where I am today. I didn't graduate high school on time. By the time I was 20, I had been arrested more than 4 times. I didn't graduate college the first time that I passed. I am a firm believer that your worst moments in life don't have to define who you can become in this world. And I want to take that vision and value set into the Department of Justice. In private practice, I spent 18 years working on behalf of consumers. I want to continue that work to protect seniors and consumers into the future. As Attorney General, as Speaker of the House, I worked incredibly hard to bring Democrats and Republicans together to keep our communities safe, passing a law that gave tools to law enforcement to get hard drugs off our streets, but also really work to get people into treatment. And finally, as we think about this, I bring the experience of someone who's managed a branch of government. $400 million dollar budget, 400 employees, and that's a level of skill set that I want to bring into this office as well. Again, the 3 things that I'm very focused on: keeping communities safe, working to protect seniors and consumers, and finally, we need somebody who matches the values in our state, working to make sure that we protect all of our rights, whether they're environmental laws or reproductive health rights. Thank you.
Hey, you already know this. I'm just going to say it anyways because I think it's important to point out. There's no DNA test that determines where somebody's a Republican or a Democrat. There's no exam you have to pass. It's not hereditary. It's just a box that you tick on at the DMV. And all of us could go and change our affiliation tomorrow, and then we could come back the next day and then change it back again. So there has to be something more than the arbitrariness of what box that we've checked for a decision of what candidate that you're going to vote for. It's no secret that Oregon is really struggling from crime, addiction, and lawlessness right now. And lawlessness and crime and addiction are indiscriminate. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. We're all experiencing the same thing. So this is not a time to vote for political parties. It's a time to vote for experience, somebody that's actually done the job before. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state, and I'm the only person on this stage that has experience enforcing the law. I've done it statewide, nationally, and internationally, and that's why law enforcement leaders across the state from both parties are overwhelmingly endorsing my campaign, and that's why crime victims are endorsing my campaign, because they want somebody that's going to lead them back to safety. My opponent has been a part-time lawyer and a full-time politician for quite some time right now. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. That's a noble task. But politics and law enforcement don't mix well. And the legacy in the legislature is that we are objectively bad at almost everything. Public schools, homelessness, crime, housing, you name it, Oregon is not good at it. So we can't keep electing the same failed leaders and expect something to get better. Leaders drive the parties, and right now, both parties are in desperate need of different leadership. I represent a dawn of a different kind of leadership, moderate, politically, get it done, show up, protect people, make neighborhoods safe kind of leadership. Oregon can do better than this. We can do so much better than this. You have to be ready for change, and you have to be ready for a new dawn of new leadership. So I hope you vote for me. Thanks.
Yes, please, a round of applause for both of our candidates, Dan Rayfield and Will Lathrop, and I think Andrew is going to close us out.
Thank you very much, Michael. This has been our September 27th, 2024 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. This coming Friday is the First Friday Art Walk that's presented by the Lane Arts Council. That starts 5:30 p.m. at Farmers Market Pavilion, and it's part of Eugene's Visual Arts Week coming up, and that's presented in partnership with the City of Eugene Cultural Services and Maude Kearns Art Center. So there's a lot of great arts events taking place. You can just Google Eugene Visual Arts Week. Check it out. Really some cool stuff. Speaking of cool stuff, City Club is back next Friday for another critical debate about a measure on the November ballot. That's Measure 118, the Corporate Tax Revenue Rebate for Residents Initiative. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful weekend.